Welcome back to the English Language Arts series. Today we're going to be talking about reading comprehension tip number 3, specifically breadcrumbs, also known as sensitivity. Okay, so we discussed in the previous tip videos as well as the intro how caring about what you're reading involves many things, but one of the things it involves is noticing subtle emotional cues. So I'm just going to be referring to that basically as breadcrumbs. So breadcrumbs are subtle emotional cues. Primarily, if you have to pick one concept, just think of it as word choice. So primarily through word choice in the article or passage, but also through phrases, ideas, context, circumstances, the reactions of the characters, and even what is not said. So the word choice sprinkled throughout the article. So for example, if I say, a discovery was made, that's different from a great discovery was made. So that relates also to that bullseye concept we discussed in previous videos. So these little words like great discovery tells you something about how I feel about it. So many of these breadcrumbs create an emergent understanding. So one of them may not tell you too much, but together, if I keep using, let's say, positive words or negative words, it creates, a picture emerges. So there's an emergent understanding of like, how does the author feel about what they're saying? So if you've always had trouble with those sorts of questions, you need to be paying attention to more breadcrumbs. And for those of you that aren't sure where I'm getting this breadcrumbs business, that's from the fairy tale with I think the boy that leaves a trail of breadcrumbs so he can find his way home. All right, so pay attention to these breadcrumbs, these little words used here and there, and let me just make a point. So oftentimes, this idea of paying attention to these subtle cues might be difficult, like especially, I just noticed, especially for technically oriented, like analytically, mathematically oriented folks, students, that are looking, and not just math folks, but in particular students that may be really good at math, but for some reason have trouble on these, like how does the author feel about this sort of questions? Because you might be looking for a one-line answer, you might be looking for a smoking gun, and there may not be a smoking gun. There might be a series of these little breadcrumbs, like giving us a hint about how the author feels. So the example I want to give, this is a gruesome example, but just to really have you guys understand it, is with lung cancer and smoking. So if you're a smoker, like hopefully none of you are smokers, but let's say somebody's a smoker, at some point you start getting little reminders that it's bad for you. You have intellectual reminders, you hear it from various people, the news, doctors, you might have read a lot of articles. Then you get various aches, pains, coughs, and these warning signs basically keep getting louder and louder, and if you don't pay attention to them, you're headed for trouble. So in the same way, these breadcrumbs are sprinkled throughout what you're reading, and if you're not paying attention to them, you're missing that subplot. You're missing a lot of what's under the radar and between the lines. So make sure you're noticing like what words is the author choosing to use. It's not arbitrary. Now, so you basically want to be sensitive to these subtle cues that are sprinkled throughout the passage and not just the main plot line. And I want to mention, so here's some sort of quick tips. So, or a tip. So, be sensitive to these subtle cues. And I want to, for those of you that are Bruce Lee fans, you might know his quote, "Boards don't hit back," from one of his movies. But my edition is, "But articles do." So here's what I'm getting at. If you don't care about what you're reading, if you don't respect your reading, it's going to disrespect you right back. So if you want to do well, you must care about what you're reading, because if you sort of ignore these breadcrumbs and these little tips, when it comes time to the questions, when it comes time to understanding what you've read, it's going to hurt you in your understanding. So just keep that in mind. Finally, for those of you that really want to practice this, I really recommend to practice this on difficult and boring passages, because that's when you're really going to be tempted to really skim over it super fast so you can get the main idea and just move on. So yes, it might be easy to work on this like on a fun fiction novel you're reading, but if you pick some really dry, difficult to understand article, that's where you're really going to get to practice this when it gets tough. So when it's tough and you're doing this, that's when you're getting the most benefit. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video.